I never thought I'd be the type to plot revenge. But here I am. My brother Peter, 34, has always been the golden child in our family. He got the looks, the charm, and according to our dad before he passed, the ambition that matters. I've done pretty well for myself too. Built my own software consulting business from scratch, bought a nice condo, travel whenever I want. But in my family's eyes, especially Peter's, I might as well be unemployed. Growing up, Peter always had to one-up me. If I got an A, he needed an A+. If I won a local competition, he had to win regionals. When our dad died from a heart attack 5 years ago, Peter somehow made even the funeral about himself with this dramatic speech that had everyone sobbing while I sat there like an awkward idiot because public speaking makes me freeze up. Anyway, last month was his rehearsal dinner at this fancy steakhouse downtown. Peter's marrying Caroline, who comes from this super wealthy Japanese-American family. Her dad owns several high-end hotels in Asia, and they're basically royalty compared to our middle-class upbringing. The dinner was packed, like 200 people, including Peter's boss, CEO of this major investment firm, most of his colleagues, and a bunch of Caroline's relatives who flew in early. I was sitting at a table near the back with my mom and some cousins. I felt awkward AF because Raven was there too. My ex, who dumped me 2 years ago. We dated for 3 years and I thought we were headed toward marriage until she got a job offer at Peter's firm. Within 6 months, she broke things off. Said we were heading in different directions. Found out later she'd been hanging out with Peter and his finance bros, who apparently spent a lot of time telling her what a loser I was. I didn't want to go to this dinner at all, but my mom begged me. She keeps trying to fix the relationship between Peter and me, even though it's been toxic since we were kids. So, I put on my best suit, the one I wear to meet big clients, and showed up. Everything was going fine. I was keeping to myself, making small talk with relatives, avoiding Raven and Peter's work friends. Then came the toast. After Caroline's dad gave this heartfelt speech about welcoming Peter to the family, Peter stood up for his turn. He thanked everyone for coming, said the usual stuff about being lucky to find Caroline, blah blah. Then he looked directly at me and his whole tone changed. I want to thank everyone who's helped me get where I am today. My parents who pushed me to excel. My mentors who saw my potential. Then he smirked. And I suppose I should thank my little brother, Joseph, too. The room got quieter. I could feel people looking at me. Joseph came to me last month. Actually, did you all know that? My basement-dwelling brother. Sorry, I mean entrepreneur. He did actual air quotes. Begged me for a job at the firm. Said his little coding hobby wasn't paying the bills anymore. That was a complete lie. I'd gone to his office to drop off our mom's birthday present since he claimed he was too busy to get her anything. He'd made some comment about having an opening for an IT guy if I was tired of playing businessman. And I told him to fuck off. I told him McDonald's was hiring, Peter continued. And people actually laughed. Some people just don't have what it takes to succeed in this world. It's natural selection, really. I sat there in shock as he raised his glass. To family, the ones who build empires and the ones who, well, build excuses. The room erupted with laughter. I saw Raven practically doubled over at her table. Even my mom was doing that uncomfortable half smile she does when she's embarrassed but doesn't want to make a scene. But the worst part, Peter's boss nodding along, looking at me with this mixture of pity and disgust. I didn't make a scene. Didn't yell or throw anything or tell everyone what an asshole Peter really is. I just smiled, finished my drink, and quietly got up to leave. As I was walking out, I heard Peter call, "Leaving so soon, Joey? Got some video games waiting at home." More laughter. Outside, I sat in my car, gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. I was shaking. This wasn't just normal sibling rivalry. This was Peter deliberately humiliating me in front of everyone that mattered to him, making sure they all saw me as some pathetic loser. I drove home in a blind rage, threw my keys against the wall hard enough to dent the plaster, poured myself 3 fingers of whiskey, and paced around my living room for hours. Around 3 a.m., I got a text from my mom asking if I was okay. I didn't respond. I wasn't okay. I was fucking furious. The next morning, I woke up with the kind of clarity that only comes from absolute rage. Peter had been putting me down our whole lives, but this was different. This was public humiliation, calculated and cruel. And for what? So he could look big in front of his boss and his rich future in-laws. I opened my laptop and started digging. Peter had mentioned the wedding venue a few times, bragging about booking the Ritz-Carlton's Grand Ballroom a year in advance. A quick search showed me just how expensive this wedding was going to be. The Ritz doesn't list prices publicly, but based on similar venues and the guest count, we're talking $150,000 minimum. Then I remembered something critical. Peter has always been terrible with money. Behind his expensive suits and fancy car, he's always living right at the edge of his means. When we were kids, he'd spend his allowance immediately, then try to borrow from me by the end of the week. I made some calls claiming to be Peter's personal assistant. The Ritz confirmed the final payment of $47,000 was due 2 days before the wedding. They were expecting a wire transfer tomorrow. That's when the idea hit me. I'm good with computers. Really good. I've done cybersecurity consulting for banks. I know how payment systems work. I wasn't going to steal from it. I wasn't going to hack anything illegally. But there are ways to make payments disappear, get flagged, delayed. I spent the next 3 days setting everything up, creating a plan that would unfold perfectly. It took some creative programming, but nothing that would actually break laws. Just a perfectly timed digital push that would send Peter's carefully planned wedding into complete chaos. Now, it's the night before his wedding. All the pieces are in place. At 6 a.m. tomorrow, while Peter is sleeping off his bachelor party, everything he's planned is going to fall apart. And the best part, he'll know exactly who did it, but he won't be able to prove a thing. Sometimes revenge is a dish best served with a system error. Update 1. Sorry for the delay updating this. The past 3 weeks have been absolute chaos. I'm posting this from a hotel room because I literally can't go home right now. But I'm getting ahead of myself. After I left Peter's rehearsal dinner, I was in this weird state of calm rage, like I wasn't throwing shit anymore, but I was methodically planning how to destroy his perfect day. I've never felt like this before. I'm usually the chill brother who lets things slide, but something in me just broke. The morning after the dinner, my mom called. I ignored it. She texted saying we needed to talk about what happened. I ignored that too. I needed to focus. First step, I needed more info about Peter's wedding payments. This was tricky. I wasn't going to hack anything or do anything illegal, but I do know how to social engineer. I called the Ritz-Carlton posing as Peter's assistant, said I was confirming payment details for the upcoming transfer. The woman I spoke to was super helpful, told me exactly when the final payment was due, 3 days before the wedding, and confirmed the amount, $47,000. She even mentioned that they were still waiting on the deposit for the honeymoon suite. Next, I needed access to Peter's email. Again, not going to hack, but Peter has used the same password pattern since we were kids. Our childhood dog's name plus year of whatever big life event plus some special character. I tried a few combinations on his personal Gmail and got in on the 3rd try. Barney 2025. If you're wondering, 2025 is probably when he expects to make partner. His inbox was full of wedding emails, vendor contracts, guest confirmations, schedule updates. The wedding planner, some woman named Dorothy, was sending daily updates with spreadsheets tracking every detail. I forwarded everything to myself, then marked the emails unread. The key discovery, Peter hadn't actually paid most of the vendors yet. He had deposits down, but final payments were all scheduled for the same day, the Wednesday before the Saturday wedding, and they were all being paid from the same account at his bank. That's when my mom showed up at my door unannounced. I was so deep in planning, I didn't even hear her knock at first. When I opened the door, she looked exhausted. She started in about how I needed to be the bigger person, how Peter has always been insecure about his intelligence compared to me, which is BS. He got into a better college and how his wedding stress was making him act out. I actually laughed in her face. I told her I was done being the family punching bag. She got weirdly quiet and asked what I was planning to do. Something in my expression must have scared her because she grabbed my arm and said not to do anything I'd regret. I pulled away and told her maybe she should have given Peter the same advice before he humiliated me in front of everyone I know. She left crying. I felt like shit but didn't call her back. That night, I got a text from Raven. First time she'd contacted me in over a year. Said she felt bad about laughing at the rehearsal dinner and wanted to check if I was okay. I didn't respond. Just another person feeling guilty after participating in my public humiliation. I spent the next few days building my plan. Peter uses this budgeting app connected to his bank account. I couldn't access the bank directly, but the app had shit security. I got in and found exactly what I expected. Peter was stretched thin financially. The wedding was costing way more than he could afford. He'd taken out a personal loan and maxed out 2 credit cards. The payment to the Ritz was scheduled through his bank's bill pay system for Wednesday at 9 a.m. I couldn't cancel it directly, but I could create enough confusion to delay it. On Tuesday, 1 week before the wedding, I got another surprise visit. This time from my uncle Stephen, my dad's best friend. He's the only person from my dad's side who still keeps in touch. He brought beer and we sat on my balcony. After some small talk, he mentioned he was surprised I was going to Peter's wedding at all after everything that happened. When I asked what he meant, he got this confused look like he'd said something he shouldn't have. After some pushing, he finally told me. Apparently, when I was in college, I got this amazing internship opportunity in Silicon Valley. It was going to pay well and potentially lead to a full-time job, but I suddenly got rejected at the last minute. I was devastated, but figured it was just bad luck. According to Uncle Stephen, it wasn't luck at all. He overheard my dad and Peter talking about it at a family barbecue. Peter had contacted the company pretending to be from my university's admin office and told them there was an issue with my transcript. The company rescinded the offer without even checking with me. I sat there stunned. That internship was my dream opportunity. I ended up taking a shitty unpaid position instead and had to move back home for a year to save money. It completely changed my career trajectory. When I asked why Peter would do that, Stephen looked uncomfortable. He said Peter told my dad he was saving me from myself because I wasn't ready for that kind of pressure. But the real reason, Peter had just started at his firm and didn't want me potentially making more money than him right out of college. The worst part, my dad knew and never told me. He actually agreed with Peter that it was for my own good. I thanked Stephen for telling me, and after he left, I finalized my plan with renewed determination. On Wednesday morning, 6 days before the wedding, I called Peter's bank posing as him. I told them I suspected fraudulent activity on my account and needed them to place a 48-hour hold on all outgoing transactions over $10,000. They asked security questions, which I knew the answers to because Peter uses the same ones everywhere. They placed the hold. Then I called the Ritz directly again as Peter's assistant. I told them there was an issue with the wire transfer and Mr. Thomas would need to pay in person on Friday instead. The coordinator sounded annoyed but said that would be fine as long as it was settled 24 hours before the event. Next, I found the email chain between Peter and Caroline's parents. They were arriving Thursday from Tokyo. Peter was supposed to arrange their airport pickup and check them into the hotel. I sent an email from his account changing their reservation to a different hotel across town, claiming the Ritz had a plumbing emergency in their scheduled suite. I also created a fake email account impersonating the wedding planner and sent messages to a few key vendors, florist, photographer, DJ, confirming that the wedding had been moved to Sunday instead of Saturday due to a scheduling conflict at the venue. Just enough to create confusion, but not enough to alert Peter immediately. By Friday morning, 2 days before the wedding, Peter's bank hold would expire. His payment to the Ritz would attempt to process, but by then his account would be flagged for suspicious activity because of all the unusual communication. At minimum, it would cause a multi-day delay. On Thursday night, my phone rang. It was Peter. I let it go to voicemail. He left a message saying Caroline's parents couldn't find their driver at the airport and the hotel had no record of their reservation. He sounded stressed, but still managed to be condescending, saying he knew I was too busy playing video games to help. But if I could pick them up as a favor, he'd appreciate it. I didn't call back. Friday morning, I woke up to 20 missed calls. 15 from Peter, 5 from my mom. I turned my phone off and went to a coffee shop to work. When I turned it back on around noon, I had a text from a number I didn't recognize. Joseph, this is Caroline. Something is wrong with all our wedding arrangements. Peter is freaking out. The Ritz says our payment never arrived, and they've given our ballroom to another event. Please call Peter if you know anything about this. I smiled and ordered another coffee. Then my phone rang again. Peter's boss. I didn't even know he had my number. Curiosity got the better of me and I answered. He sounded weirdly friendly, asking if I was available to meet Peter at the Ritz to sort out a misunderstanding. Said Peter was too upset to handle it himself. I said I'd think about it and hung up. I drove past the Ritz on my way home. There was Peter in the lobby shouting at the event coordinator while Caroline cried nearby. Her parents stood off to the side looking horrified. I watched through the glass doors for a minute, then drove away. When I got home, I had an email notification. The wedding planner had sent out an emergency update to all the guests. The wedding was still on, but moved to Caroline's parents' hotel across town. They'd managed to book a small conference room on short notice. But the best part, I checked Peter's bank account through the budgeting app one last time. His attempt to pay the Ritz had triggered a fraud alert. His accounts were temporarily frozen. At 11:30 p.m., my doorbell rang. I looked through the peephole. It was Caroline alone. Mascara streaked down her face. I almost didn't answer, but something made me open the door. Update 2. I opened the door to find Caroline standing there looking like absolute hell. Her makeup was smeared, hair falling out of what was probably a fancy updo earlier. For a split second, I felt a twinge of guilt. Then I remembered Peter's smug face as he humiliated me. And that feeling evaporated real quick. She didn't wait for an invitation, just pushed past me into my apartment. I was sort of shocked by how aggressive she was. Always seemed like this quiet, polite person whenever I'd met her before. Her first words weren't what I expected. She wasn't screaming or accusing me. Instead, she looked around my place and said my apartment was nicer than Peter had described. Said he always talked about me living in some kind of sad bachelor dump. That pissed me off all over again. Then she got to the point. The Ritz had canceled their ballroom reservation. Their payment hadn't gone through. With less than 24 hours notice. The hotel had given it to someone else. They'd scrambled to book a conference room at her parents' hotel, but it was tiny and nothing was ready. Half the vendors were confused about the date and location. Her parents were humiliated in front of their friends who had flown in from Japan. I just stood there listening, arms crossed. She asked point blank if I had anything to do with it. I didn't answer directly, just asked why she'd come to me instead of focusing on fixing things. That's when she dropped the bomb. Apparently, Peter had been acting weird all week, checking his phone constantly, making secretive calls. When everything started falling apart today, he didn't react with surprise. He immediately said my name and started calling me nonstop. When I didn't answer, he threw his phone against the wall of their hotel room and started ranting about how I'd always been jealous of him, how I was trying to ruin his life because I couldn't handle him being successful. Caroline had never seen him like that before. She said it scared her. That's when she decided to come see me herself. I still didn't admit anything, just asked why I should care about Peter's problems after what he did to me at the rehearsal dinner. She looked genuinely confused. Said she remembered Peter's toast being a little teasing, but not that bad. That's when I lost it. I pulled out my phone and played the recording I'd made. Yeah, I recorded that shit. Not because I planned revenge at that moment, but because I was so shocked I wanted proof of what he'd said. Caroline listened to the whole thing, her face getting paler by the second. When it finished, she sat down on my couch without asking. Said she had no idea he'd said those things. She'd been in the bathroom during his toast and only caught the end when everyone was laughing. She thought it was just normal brother jokes. She asked again if I'd sabotaged the wedding. This time I just smiled. She stood up suddenly, called me an asshole and said I was just as bad as Peter. I opened my front door and told her to leave. As she walked out, she turned and said Peter had already called his bank and figured out what I'd done. He had proof now. I slept like a baby that night. At 5:45 a.m., my phone started blowing up. First, a text from my mom saying Peter had called her hysterical. Then, 7 calls from Peter in a row. I ignored them all and made coffee. At 6:30, I got a single text from Peter. Fix this now or I swear to God, I will destroy you. I almost laughed. What exactly did he think he could do to me that he hadn't already done? I decided to drive by the Ritz around 8 a.m. just to see the chaos. The parking lot was already filling up with confused guests in formal wear. Some poor employee was standing outside explaining to people that the Thomas Tanaka wedding had been moved. Nobody seemed to know where. I spotted Caroline's parents trying to direct guests to cars for the trip across town. They looked stressed AF. Part of me felt bad for them. They seemed like decent people caught in the crossfire, but Peter had brought this on himself. Around 9 a.m., I got a call from Uncle Stephen. He sounded serious, asked if I could meet him for breakfast. I agreed and met him at this diner near my place. When I walked in, I realized my mom was with him, too. They'd clearly been talking about me before I arrived. Mom looked like she hadn't slept, and Stephen had this weird, nervous energy. They waited until after we ordered to bring up the wedding disaster. Mom started in on how Peter was going through something, and how I needed to be the bigger person. I cut her off and played the recording of Peter's toast. She'd been sitting at my table, but claimed she hadn't heard clearly what he said. Now, she had no excuse. She started crying. Stephen just looked pissed. Not at me surprisingly, but at Peter. He asked what exactly I'd done. I was careful not to admit to anything illegal, just said maybe Peter should check his payment settings and vendor confirmations more carefully. That's when my phone buzzed with a text from a number I didn't recognize. It was a photo of my building's lobby with the message coming up. I showed it to Stephen and Mom. Told them I had to go. I rushed home but was too late. Peter was pounding on my door when I got off the elevator. When he saw me, he charged like a fucking bull, grabbed me by my shirt, and slammed me against the wall. I shoved him off hard and he stumbled back. He was screaming about how I'd ruined everything, how Caroline's parents wanted her to postpone the wedding, how his boss had seen the whole meltdown at the Ritz, and was questioning his judgment. Neighbors were opening their doors to watch. I stayed calm, which just made him madder. Asked how exactly I was supposed to have done all this. He got right in my face and said he'd talked to the bank. They confirmed someone had called pretending to be him and put a hold on his accounts. They had the phone number. My phone number. I hadn't thought of that. I'd used my own phone like an idiot. But I didn't panic. Instead, I pulled out my phone, opened my voice recording app, and hit record. Then I asked Peter why he'd sabotaged my Silicon Valley internship in college. The look on his face was priceless. Complete shock followed by this weird, guilty expression. He stepped back, suddenly quiet. I pressed harder, asked if Dad knew what he'd done. Asked if he'd told Caroline about how he derailed my career before it even started. He just stared at me. Then he tried a different approach. Said we could fix this. He could still salvage the wedding if I called the Ritz and explained that there had been a mistake. He'd even apologize for the toast if that's what I wanted. I laughed in his face, told him it was too late. The damage was done just like when he sabotaged my internship. He couldn't undo it with an apology. That's when he snapped. Started saying how I'd always been the favorite. How Dad always bragged about my potential while pushing Peter to work harder. How Mom would fawn over my coding projects but barely acknowledged his 80-hour work weeks. How everyone always made excuses for me while holding him to impossible standards. I was genuinely surprised. This was not the narrative I'd grown up with. In my version, Peter was the golden child and I was the disappointment. But listening to him rant, I realized he'd felt the exact opposite. When he finally ran out of steam, I just said, "So, you've been punishing me my entire life because you were jealous." He didn't answer, just looked away. I told him to leave. Said we were done, not just for now, but forever. He finally left, but not before warning me this wasn't over. I spent the rest of the day holed up in my apartment, ignoring calls and texts. Around 7 p.m., when the wedding reception would have been in full swing, I got a text from Raven. "What did you do to Peter?" I blocked her number. At 10 p.m., my building's security called up. Peter's boss was in the lobby asking to speak with me. I was curious enough to agree. He came up alone, wearing what was clearly his wedding suit. Introduced himself properly. James, CEO of the investment firm where Peter worked, said he wanted to understand what had happened today. I was cautious, didn't admit to anything, just showed him the recording of Peter's toast instead. He listened without expression, then asked if he could sit down. What he said next floored me. He'd been having concerns about Peter's ethics at work for months. Nothing concrete enough to act on, but enough to make him wary. Today's meltdown, combined with what he'd just heard on the recording, confirmed his suspicions about Peter's character. Then he asked if I had any other examples of Peter's behavior I'd be willing to share. Something about his tone made me nervous. This wasn't just a concerned friend of my brother. This was a CEO looking for ammunition. I said I needed to think about it, and he left his card. As he was leaving, he mentioned casually that Peter had been making some questionable investment recommendations to clients lately. Nothing illegal, but ethically dubious. After he left, I sat on my couch wondering what the hell had just happened. Had I just been approached to help get my brother fired? Was that what I wanted? I was still processing when my phone rang at 3 a.m. It was Caroline again. She was sobbing so hard I could barely understand her. Peter had completely lost it after the wedding disaster. He'd trashed their hotel room, screamed at her parents, and accused everyone of conspiring against him. When she tried to calm him down, he'd grabbed her arm hard enough to leave marks. That's when her father had stepped in and physically removed Peter from the room. Now, Peter was calling her nonstop, alternating between rage and begging. She ended with words that chilled me. He says he's coming to your place now. He's drunk and he has your dad's old gun. I hung up and called 911. Final update. After Caroline's call, I grabbed my wallet and keys and got the hell out of my apartment. I called 911 from the stairwell, told them my brother was drunk, armed, and threatening to come to my place. The dispatcher kept asking for details I didn't have, what kind of gun, exactly where Peter was now, if he had specifically threatened to shoot me. I just kept saying I didn't know, just that my brother was dangerous and headed to my address. I waited in my car across the street. At 3:32 a.m., Peter's Audi screeched into my building's parking lot. He practically fell out of the driver's seat, definitely wasted. I couldn't see a gun, but his right hand was tucked inside his jacket in a way that made my stomach drop. 2 police cars pulled up about 40 seconds later. I watched as they approached Peter, who was now shouting my name and pounding on the building's front door. When they tried to talk to him, he started screaming about how I'd ruined his life. One cop put his hand on his holster when Peter pulled his hand out of his jacket, but there was no gun, just his phone. They talked for a few minutes, then put him in the back of a police car, not in handcuffs, so I figured they were just going to drive him home or to the drunk tank to sleep it off. I checked into a hotel downtown using the Marriott app so I wouldn't have to talk to anyone. Passed out around 5 a.m., completely drained. Woke up to a shitload of notifications. Missed calls from my mom, Uncle Stephen, Caroline, even Raven. Texts asking where I was, if I was okay, a voicemail from the police asking me to come to the station to give a statement. I ordered room service and tried to piece together what happened from everyone's messages. Apparently, Peter hadn't had my dad's gun after all. It was still in my mom's safe where it had been since Dad died, but he'd been telling everyone at the ruined wedding reception that he was going to make me pay. When the cops picked him up outside my building, his alcohol level was over twice the legal limit. While I was eating breakfast, my phone rang. Caroline again. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. She sounded exhausted. Said Peter had been released from police custody this morning. Her parents had officially called off the wedding and were flying back to Tokyo tomorrow. The CEO, James, had called Peter in for an emergency meeting at 10 a.m. I asked why she was telling me all this. She said she didn't know. Maybe because she felt I deserved to know how completely my revenge had worked. But then her tone changed. She asked if I knew what Peter had been doing at work lately. I said no, just that his boss had seemed concerned. Caroline dropped a bombshell. Peter had been making risky investments for his clients without full disclosure, taking bigger commissions while hiding the real risks. Nothing outright illegal, but seriously unethical. James had been investigating quietly, and the wedding meltdown had accelerated everything. I felt weirdly conflicted. My revenge was about the personal humiliation, not destroying Peter's entire life, but I couldn't exactly say I felt bad either. I checked out of the hotel around noon and drove to my mom's house. Figured I should explain my side before Peter poisoned the well completely. Mom opened the door looking like she'd aged 10 years overnight. Uncle Stephen was there too, sitting at the kitchen table with coffee. The first thing Mom said was, "Did you really call the police on your brother?" I played her the voicemail from Caroline about Peter coming with a gun. Mom went pale and sat down hard in the nearest chair. Uncle Stephen asked to hear it again, then nodded like something made sense now. He told me Peter had shown up at my mom's house at 2 a.m. demanding to know where Dad's gun was kept. When Mom refused to open the safe, he'd ransacked the house looking for the key. That's when Stephen, who lives nearby, had come over after Mom called him panicking. The three of us sat in silence for a minute. Then Mom asked the question I knew was coming. "Why did you ruin his wedding?" I didn't bother denying it anymore. Just played the recording of Peter's toast, followed by my conversation with Peter where he essentially admitted sabotaging my internship. Mom started crying. Stephen looked like he wanted to punch something. Mom asked if there was any way to fix things between Peter and me. I told her no. That bridge was completely burned. Some things can't be undone, and I wasn't interested in forgiving Peter for years of shit that culminated in public humiliation. As we were talking, my phone buzzed with a text from James, Peter's boss. "Need to speak with you urgently. Can you come to my office today?" I texted back that I'd be there at 3 o'clock. When I got to the investment firm's building, the receptionist led me straight to James' corner office. The view of the city was impressive, but what really caught my attention was Peter sitting there looking like absolute shit. Red eyes, rumpled clothes, stubble. The look he gave me could have melted steel. James got right to business, said he'd been investigating Peter's client accounts for months and had found multiple instances of ethical violations. Nothing that would land him in jail, but enough to get him fired and possibly blacklisted in the industry. Then he did something unexpected. He pulled out a folder and handed it to me. Inside were printouts of emails between Peter and the company where I'd been offered that Silicon Valley internship years ago. Emails where Peter, posing as a university administrator, claimed there were serious concerns about my academic integrity. I looked up at James, confused about why he had these. He explained that when Peter started working at the firm, he'd used his work email to contact my university, trying to get access to my academic records, probably looking for actual dirt he could use against me. The IT department had flagged it as potential identity theft and kept a record. When James started investigating Peter's ethics, he found this in the archives. Peter just sat there staring at the floor. James then said something that caught me completely off guard. He asked if I'd be interested in consulting for their firm on cybersecurity. Said anyone who could cause the level of chaos I did without breaking any laws clearly knew what they were doing. I laughed, thinking he was joking. He wasn't. Peter finally spoke up, his voice shaking. Said if I took the job, he'd make sure I regretted it every single day. James cut him off mid-sentence. Peter wouldn't be in a position to do anything because, as of this morning, he was suspended pending an internal review. Peter completely lost it. Started shouting about how I'd always tried to take everything from him, how our parents always loved me more, how he'd worked his ass off while I just coasted on being the smart one. Then he lunged across the desk at me. I stepped back, but not before he managed to grab my shirt. James called security and 2 guys had to physically drag Peter out while he screamed threats the whole way. One of the last things he yelled was that Caroline had only been interested in him for his money and status anyway. And now I'd ruined that too. After security removed him, James apologized. Said he had no idea how deep Peter's issues ran. We talked for a bit longer about the consulting opportunity, and I said I'd think about it. It was good money, but working in the same industry as Peter felt weird, even if he wasn't there. As I was leaving, I ran into Raven in the elevator. Awkward as hell. She tried to make small talk, then said she'd heard about what happened with Peter, asked if I was okay. I just looked at her and asked why she'd laughed at Peter's toast if we'd dated for 3 years. She had the decency to look ashamed. Said she was trying to fit in with the finance crowd, that she didn't really think those things about me. I didn't respond, just got off at the next floor and took the stairs the rest of the way. When I got home, there was an envelope taped to my door. Inside was a check from Caroline's father for $10,000 and a note that just said, "Thank you." I was confused until I got a text from Caroline explaining that her father had figured out what Peter was really like because of the wedding disaster, saving her from what would have been a terrible marriage. The next day, my mom called. Peter had emptied his condo and left town without telling anyone where he was going. His car was gone from the firm's parking garage. She was worried about him. I wasn't. 3 days later, James called to tell me the firm's investigation had uncovered enough to terminate Peter's employment permanently. He'd already sent a company-wide email announcing Peter's departure. The consulting offer was still open if I wanted it. I turned it down. Instead, I used Caroline's father's check as seed money to expand my own business. First client, Caroline's father's hotel chain, upgrading their payment security systems. It's been 2 months now. Peter eventually surfaced in Chicago, working for a much smaller firm. He hasn't contacted anyone in the family except Mom, who he calls occasionally, but never mentions me. Caroline reached out last week, asked if I wanted to get coffee sometime. I said, no, too weird. Too much baggage. Uncle Stephen comes over for beers every Thursday now. Says he should have stepped in years ago when he saw how Peter treated me, but he didn't want to get between brothers. He's the one who told me something I never knew. That my dad had actually left Peter more money than me because he thought I could take care of myself, but Peter needed the help. Ironic. So, that's where things stand. I got my revenge, but it spiraled into something bigger than I planned. Do I regret it? Not for a second. Peter spent our entire lives trying to tear me down to build himself up. All I did was show everyone who he really was. Some people might say I went too far, that I should have just confronted him directly or let it go. But those people weren't there when 200 people laughed at me. When the brother who should have had my back stabbed me in it instead. They don't know what it's like to swallow that humiliation and smile through it. My only regret is not doing it sooner.